Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Good morning. My name is Anthony English. I'll be speaking to you today about challenges in the Internet of Things and focusing on some, not just the challenges, but some opportunities and also some of the standards and emerging security elements that are coming out in support of IoT. As you can see in the slideshow, I've been in the security field for quite a number of years, and I'm currently working with Mariner Security Solutions here in Canada. And we provide security consulting services to a lot of clients in the region and some clients outside of our region. So we're going to run through some discussion to start off today, covering the background of IoT and what IoT consists of. Probably a lot of people on the call, if not everyone, has heard of the concept of Internet of Things. It's actually not a new term. It was coined originally in 1999 by a couple of researchers. And before that, it was actually an evolving idea or concept at MIT, where a Coca-Cola machine was originally hooked up to transmit when soda supplies were low, or when the soda in the machine wasn't warm enough, or wasn't cold enough, sorry, when it got warm. So the idea has been evolving for quite some time. And we've seen it emerge as a technology today, mostly from the consumer-driven side of things, where you see products like electronic thermostats in homes that are connected to Wi-Fi, so that you can remotely control or monitor the temperature conditions in your home. Remote-controlled closed-circuit television cameras, or CCTVs, for monitoring your home or for monitoring a business remotely. In the medical field, we've seen advances with IoT or connected devices, even implanted inside of humans, things like pacemakers that can be controlled and adjusted without connecting anything to the patient. We've seen it in appliances. Refrigerators, for example, nowadays you can get them with a built-in screen that will show you the current weather outside, like you order groceries from your refrigerator, and a bunch of other things. Connect that device directly to the internet through your home network. Smart TVs have really been in the news a lot lately as an IoT device because of some weaknesses in the security of the devices and how the smart element is actually operating on the television. We'll talk more about that again later. Printers, definitely we've seen printing devices, home printing devices, connected to the IoT through their own internal print sharing capabilities. Vehicles as well, they can be not just controlled from a key anymore. Now you can control them from your smartphone. You can start them, you can find them, all through remote connection technologies. And then other types of devices like Fitbits and all those other things that are kind of on the fringe of IoT. And in some definitions of IoT, personal health devices like Fitbits or fitness watches or fitness devices aren't considered true IoT devices, but I've included them here because some definitions also include them. The types of connections you see to these devices include Bluetooth or wireless, Wi-Fi, but there's other types of specific connectivity protocols and services for IoT devices that are more on the industrial side or non-consumer based kind of approach for use. So here's what the layers of IoT kind of look like. You have endpoint devices. They can include vehicles, farm resources, even animals can be implanted with IoT transmitting devices. Medical devices, smart TVs. It could be buildings or infrastructure utilities. Utilities meaning power grid systems or power supply systems, which are typically based on SCADA, but they can be connected in an IoT type of a way so that you can remotely control and monitor the distribution network or the grid for the power distribution. There's gateways that connect those endpoint devices somehow to a local mesh network or local grid network, and allows them to talk between themselves and allows them to be communicated with remotely. And this could be, as I said, something wireless, a Wi-Fi, a Bluetooth, or some proprietary type protocols as well. This gateway also serves as the link point from the Bluetooth or the endpoint IoT device, a Bluetooth enabled or Wi-Fi enabled device, out to a bigger network. And that's our next layer, the telecom or internet link. These links actually can be some of the more sensitive areas in an IoT network that you really have to watch. You have to watch how that traffic comes and goes onto that local grid network or mesh network that the IoT devices are connected to. At the end of that chain would be the consumer of the information and the influencer of the IoT devices. And that could be an end user using a smartphone. It could be a big data type application gathering information from multiple IoT devices to form an analyzed and cohesive set of data. Or could be an automation function if you think about production facilities that are roboticized and use IoT to run the production lines. So, where is IoT? Well, as I said at the start of the presentation, IoT is prevalent in multiple layers of society today. And you can see this if you look at the numbers. By 2020, it's predicted there'll be 30 billion IoT type connected devices live on the internet, connected to a larger network. From 2016 to 2017, there was a 31% increase in IoT devices. That's 31% is a pretty big jump, up to 8.4 billion devices currently estimated for 2017. In the medical field, physicians and medical product manufacturers have seized upon this as a quick and efficient way to gather medical information from patients and from patient test devices. There's implantable devices that I talked about before, and I've added a couple of other ones here. A really evolving one that's become quite a market right now are insulin pumps, connected insulin pumps. So you can control them and monitor them from a wireless device. There's pacemakers, as I said, and we heard a lot about those in the news a couple of years back at a Black Hat event. It was shown how you can actually hack into some pacemaker type devices back at that point in time and influence their operation without ever being connected to them. And then there's medical devices, tools, and networks. Now, I worked in healthcare for a few years myself in the IT side and ran into this constantly, where there was this evolving technology coming out for connecting these devices and how would we secure it and how would we stop someone from walking through the hospital and connecting to that thing and influencing its operation. So there's things like CAT scan machines, there's bedside data systems, those large computer type systems you see hooked up to patients. They can be connected to an IoT mesh network, an IoT network. There's portable intensive care units devices, which again are critical type care systems that collect information and help to monitor the patient and give the caregivers information on the current status in a real-time sort of way. On automotive, you can see this every day when you go to a car lot that's promoting its latest vehicle. Vehicles have become far more computerized, of course, over the years, but in addition to that, they're becoming more connected. It's not unusual at all today to see a system in your car and your dashboard that can collect messages for you. You can use voice commands with it. You can actually check your car's status from your smartphone if you like. Especially true if you have an electric vehicle or a hybrid electric vehicle. You can check its charge status from your smartphone. There's cars now or vehicles now that include remote entry systems or lock systems. So you don't have to touch or be near the car. You can do it with your phone again. All this leads to that device being a connected system, that whole car being a connected system, in the IoT universe. One of the larger innovations of IoT lately has been a push for smart cities. A smart city is a city that can collect various types of information, which typically would be siloed, and combine them into one set of metadata, which can then be used by the municipality or the city to do city planning, to do city monitoring, to do budget analysis, the best use of the money for the upcoming budget year, and to also manage the flow of people and things within the municipality or the city. This can include everything from watching traffic flow, parking management, to people management, the flow of people within the city, environmental issues. We saw actually a request for proposals recently from a municipality where they're looking for someone to come in and help them with the IoT network to collect information related to planning for global climate change in the municipality, because they're a coastal city. So they wanted to collect that information from multiple remote sensors and remote devices, and then combine that in a cohesive data set so they can plan each year for the changes that might come with the changing weather patterns. Power grid monitoring and manipulation of all these different elements as well are all part of a smart city solution. The end goal could be things like allowing residents of the city to bring up an app to that city and see the current state of traffic flow in various areas, to see what's going on in the city today in different areas. If there's a concert in the park or something, it would have that information available to this collected smart information. You could actually check the cameras near the park and see what the crowds look like and where you might want to park around that area. And then really, most importantly, the benefit of a smart city hopefully will be to allow more people in a smaller space to coexist comfortably and efficiently. Food supply is another hot area for IoT, and this came to light, was demonstrated in Europe a few years back when there was a food scare around some food supplies that had been promoted as being one type of food, but it was actually a different type of food. With IoT in the management of the food chain, you can not just track grocery store products, but you can actually track the products all the way back to a farm, back to where it was created or where it was grown or where it was raised. So at the very far left in this diagram, there's a pick and prep box. That's at the farm level. So you can go back and track, for example, when that ear of corn was plucked off the stalk in the field, at what date and what time. And that gives you your timing on how soon that thing should get to a store or a shop to be sold before it becomes a produce product that isn't that reliable for its quality. This also allows you to do things like plan growth cycles for the food and the caring of animals that might be in the food chain, and planning for your delivery and your seasonal uptake of different foodstuffs. It's also tracked at the packing level, again, so you can see where it is in the handling phase of the operation, at what point in time it gets put into the packing phase. You can track transportation of the foodstuffs. Again, the view is to keep the food fresh, keep it going to the correct distribution points, and then from there to the correct destinations. The distribution out of those central clearing houses is important. Again, you're trying to watch the freshness, you're trying to watch the handling, you're trying to watch the food flow to make sure you have the right food in the right locations for the optimal distribution. And then on the consumer side, you can track it when it's on the shelf. So those are broken down into preparation, transit, and shelf life as the three general categories of how IoT can influence food handling. For utilities are still growing into this sector of IoT, but we do see it becoming far more common lately with things like smart meters. A smart meter in the power distribution business is something attached to your home that reports in real time your current power consumption rates and can help you optimize actually your own power consumption around times of day when power consumption might be cheaper or more economical versus the times when it's in more demand and is actually more expensive to use. Smart meters are also a way for the power distribution companies to check and monitor for when they need to increase power feed or when they can back it off and help them maintain their power grids in a more real-time sort of manner. In this picture I put together, you can see there's a home use for this type of IoT system where at the home user end, you can even go a bit further. You can say, I've got a thermostat on my wall that I can control with my smartphone to help reduce my costs on my power consumption and save myself some money. On the industrial side, obviously industrial systems and sites are far more sensitive to power consumption because they want to make sure they optimize their bottom dollar, the bottom line, by not consuming at high rate intervals, high rate times of the day, and instead consume their power when the power is a better price. And they can do that through various mechanisms. There's even systems built specifically for businesses to purchase that can control and manage your power consumption in buildings and give you a real-time view of it. Also important for anybody on that commercial side of the fence who's interested in carbon tax credits or things like that. If they're looking to optimize their power consumption, that can help with their carbon tax credits. Building and commercial usage, this would be in office buildings and so on. Similar concepts to industrial, except it's more focused on keeping that power consumption managed so that you're not over-consuming power when you don't need to. Making sure lights are turned off automatically, making sure power usage is adjusted by peak time usage, and then also making sure that heating and cooling systems are optimized. We did see an example, I think it was 2 years ago, when commercial building systems that were connected via IoT tech systems were hacked in Europe, and the hacker purposely went in just to mess around with the power systems and to turn on lights and activate heating and cooling systems or deactivate them, just to show it could be done. Multi-tenant buildings are also critical for anybody who is a landlord or has apartment buildings. They want to make sure that their power usage is optimized again. I know in some big cities, even here in Canada, in Toronto, I was talking to a multi-apartment building owner, and they were telling me how they're forced to turn the heat on as of September 1st every year due to city requirements around making sure that there's heat in the building as soon as the fall starts. Because of course, fall and winter here in Canada can be quite cold. And they were forced to turn it on that date, regardless of whether or not there was actually a need for it to be on, because we can have very warm falls sometimes, and with climate change, that has been happening more often. So it was kind of a waste of power, and tenants would usually, if they could, they'd open windows, or they just would suffer having a very hot building. So with a properly connected IoT system connected to even a smart city or a smart power grid, you could actually not have that kind of a carte blanche requirement or law in the city. Instead, you could have it tuned by the temperatures outside and have everything managed more efficiently. Manufacturing, of course, is going to embrace IoT because it can mean consistent production, and it can also mean reduced costs if it's done correctly. And this picture I brought from Verizon, and it kind of shows just generally some percentages around how IoT is being adopted in manufacturing. IoT obviously is providing some advantage, otherwise it's not going to be adopted by businesses and production facilities. And the way I've seen it done, even in large warehousing systems, in my experience, is you have, as you see in that diagram, very few human beings in that building, and a lot of roboticized systems or automated systems, which can be controlled, monitored, and have their capacities and their capabilities monitored and adjusted by a human. There's also AI systems you can add on to these types of environments to even remove a lot of human interaction. However, right now it's mostly human-based because a human-based controller can do quick changes as well to the system in the event of a a change in the requirements from the production. You may have a customer drop a large order for a particular product on you, for example, and if they're a big enough customer, you may take a line in your production facility and switch it over to just that customer's production from other things that may have been scheduled to do at that time. Now, it is said as well in this diagram, and this is more true in production facilities where there's a risk of injury for human beings, that this can improve safety as well. It certainly can, because if you have robotic devices, obviously you're not putting humans at risk of injuring themselves or getting injured on production lines. And it is reliable, and it's very repeatable and very consistent in its performance levels. And again, one thing that's probably isn't the best at doing is adjusting to instant changes. However, it can, as you see at the top of this diagram, it can actually provide you with information on statistics for customer consumption or customer orders. So you can pull all that stuff out in real time and track demands from customers. And we have a client here in this region who's quite a large manufacturer of personal consumer products, and they use that kind of information all the time to predict their busiest moments in the year for each type of customer they have, so they can pre-prepare. And it's certainly made their processes far more streamlined in that regard. At home, I think we've all seen the products in the various technology stores and on Amazons in the world and everywhere else, all these different things you can get for your home to control things remotely or have things automated. From heating and cooling systems to lighting systems, even smart light bulbs exist now, to home entry systems, which you can control with a phone through Bluetooth, to surveillance systems for your home, alarm systems, even some, I've noticed that some food preparation devices, coffee machines, for example, now come enabled for IoT, so you can check your coffee status when you get up in the morning on your smartphone and see how close it is to being ready, or you can pause it, or you can start it to brew right away. So there's lots of things happening on the home consumer product end, and all of that can be controlled from your smartphone device. So what do the guts look like for IoT type networks and devices? If you don't recognize a lot of these things on the screen right now, I wouldn't be at all surprised. There's quite a collection of operating systems and technologies built specifically for IoT. I think the one that jumps out of the screen at me right away is the one right in the middle at the top, the Tiny OS. This is one thing that's known to be a common element of IoT type devices is they're small. They're small in their brain power, their processing power, and they're small in their ability to store information and their storage capacity. They're not large devices to begin with. If you think about it, you're dealing with a very small circuit board with very limited capacity on it. So whatever you build on it has to be very tiny, very efficient, and you can only put so much information and capabilities into the device before you need more storage and more processing power. So a lot of these technologies that are around today for building IoT devices, these are based on small coding platforms, small footprint code, small footprint devices. Windows has evolved its mobile operating systems into what it calls Windows IoT. And that was Windows Embedded previously. I remember when it was Windows Embedded when it came out, and how everyone thought, well, what will you do with that? Because at the time there wasn't a lot of application for it. But today it's obviously there's a large market for IoT devices. So Windows has evolved their product. Google built a product called Brillo, which tries to address security weaknesses within IoT. I'm going to talk about those in a moment. And from all outside views, it's a great attempt, it's a great step forward. But you notice that Google's working separately from Windows, from Microsoft, on their products. all of these companies are working kind of independently. All these organizations work independently. The goal is to try to get them all bringing their same idea, their ideas to the table, and having them all working from the same kind of a standardized approach. You can do that to a certain extent with IoT devices, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but there is a common layering of technology and functionality in IoT that could be better standardized across the different manufacturers. Contiki at the bottom, as you notice, is an open source product, an open source operating system just for IoT. And this is really just a short list of IoT operating systems and development platforms that exist today. You can even Google how to build an IoT device, for example, and you'll get tons of other options out there for building your platforms. As some of you may notice or recognize a little circuit board in this diagram, some may not. That's a Raspberry Pi. Raspberry is a small computer on a single board, and it's not like a supercomputer or anything, but it has, as you notice in that picture, a lot of connections, a lot of different ways you can connect to it. And because it is small footprint and a small device, it takes a low amount of power, you can use it for a lot of different things. And it has been put in a lot of different IoT devices around the world. It's very common, and one place where you've seen it come up a lot are on CCTV devices, closed circuit television cameras, video cameras, because it is such a small footprint and a simple device to work with, and they're very cheap to purchase. And the problem is they can be easier to break into if you're looking to do that. And it was a real problem 2 years ago with the Raspberry Pi board and some security issues with it, which manufacturer claims were addressed later on in the next version. The jury is still debating on that one, but it is a common type of device you see for these IoT type systems. I've also put a screenshot up of nothing I'm going to promote, but there are ways you can also get very simple devices on the web right now for kind of intercepting signals to IoT devices. So we're going to talk about that next. These are two very unique features of IoT, that you have a small footprint platform to begin with, but then also you have a way you can easily intercept information and signals and influence them. So here's some of the risk areas that have been brought out with IoT. The Hacker News reported recently a rapidly growing IoT botnet. Now, 2 years ago, we probably all heard about an IoT attack on the eastern seaboard of North America, a little over 2 years ago, where hackers used CCTV cameras that were connected IoT style and just flooded the infrastructure, network infrastructure, and those networks where they existed, and then branched out to the next nearest domain server nodes and took out whole swaths of the internet on the eastern seaboard of the United States and Canada. And I definitely experienced that slowdown. You could see it spread as you're watching real time, the spread of the attack. It spread very quickly because the IoT devices being attacked were A, small footprint, B, not that smart, C, not that much storage, and they didn't have really much security around them at all. So the spread was very fast. The attack was not a very sophisticated attack, but it exploited those weaknesses, those known weaknesses in IoT. And again, those weaknesses include the fact that IoT end devices don't have much processing power. They don't have much storage to store information or historical information to try to keep track of what they're supposed to be doing when. And they really, for the most part, don't come with much security. So not much security. I want to touch on that now, especially as it relates to CCTV. I saw an ad for a CCTV camera for home that you can control with your smartphone. You can access it from anywhere in the world through internet. And its connection protocol or methodology that it was using was straight old HTTP. with no encryption and no protection. And I couldn't find where it had a password anywhere in the configuration or anything could change for a password. So I might not be the only person looking at that camera remotely from anywhere in the world or recording information from it. And this is not an uncommon event. We've seen this with things like remotely connected baby monitors, where they could be intercepted and controlled or monitored remotely by someone else in the world. So the risks around IoT are real, and they've been proven. And the botnet attack is just one example. The largest botnet that was identified recently was Reaper, and they estimated at the time of that article that there were 28,000 devices worldwide that were compromised with Reaper. They were part of the Reaper network, but they were warning it could grow exponentially at any time because it was using IoT devices. And since there's so many IoT devices globally, 8.4 billion estimated at the end of 2017, the capability for doing a global attack with IoT is pretty strong, pretty high. Before Reaper, there was another type of botnet that had been released called Mirai, and Mirai was based on same kind of principles. Reaper was just a newer version of Mirai, a bit more pervasive. On the right is a U.S. Department of Homeland Security bulletin as well. Obviously, governments take notice of these types of things. And Department of Homeland Security regularly issues bulletins, as probably everyone knows, so it's U.S. CERT program. And this advisory was dedicated to Internet of Things and the various types of cyber exploitation that can come from IoT. What their estimates in this article, if you read the details, they're estimating 20 to 50 billion IoT devices by 2020, whereas other estimates are 30 billion by 2020. But it's obviously a huge growth area, a lot of that caused by consumer consumption of IoT devices in various forms, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So that growth rate in the number of devices on this screen, that could change tomorrow. We don't know exactly how many devices there will be by 2020. But once compromised, as I say here, cyber criminals can facilitate attacks on other networks. So the IoT type infrastructure isn't an endpoint for these types of attacks typically. And we saw that with that East Coast North America attack. They're usually a stepping stone to launch the real attack. It can be everything from spam, as they say here, to theft of personal information, physical security issues. For example, if you get a hold of a building control system, maybe you can, or a building security system, maybe you can lock all the doors in the building and suddenly no one can get in or out. So there's various ways you can utilize these types of attacks once you're in. And the danger is there's so many types of devices, as you saw earlier in the presentation. There's so many opportunities to get your exploit planted. And there's no one real single way that's built in to protect those devices. This was a pacemaker attack, and this was a version 2 of that attack, of that weakness that was discovered. And this is in September of last year. It was reported that a particular manufacturer of pacemakers, and they manufactured quite a few, as you can see by this number, had built these devices without any kind of protection, and they were IoT enabled, so they were ready for wireless connectivity for monitoring. It's a great idea because with a wirelessly connected pacemaker, not only can the patient check the current status of their pacemaker with an app or on a smartphone or device like that, but a doctor could do it in a doctor's office, or they could check it wirelessly remotely. So medical care becomes more enabled for remote care with this type of device. The problem is the devices that were manufactured originally with no security on them, someone could, with the right motivation, I guess, and the right set of tools, could hack into those pacemakers and turn them off, which would be catastrophic for human life. So the dangers around this are quite obvious, but the fix is also something that's critical. So in this case, Abbott had released a firmware update. So anybody with those pacemakers, was basically a product recall. They had to go in and get the firmware update applied to their pacemakers to add protection. Some protocol and framework discussion. Because IoT has grown fast and it's become ubiquitous in a very short space of time, from consumer all the way up to industrial use, the growth of the field of IoT has precipitated a similar growth in protocols and frameworks around IoT. So these are just some of the protocols used by IoT systems. And some of these look familiar to us, like IPv4, IPv6. Those are known protocols and known communication protocols for us for IT networking. So they should look quite familiar. The way that these are matched up, though, if I was to draw the OSI reference model, the physical data link network, and so on, all the way up to the top, next to these protocols, and try to fit them into the OSI reference model, which is a common methodology used to build IT protocols and IT communication methods and applications, and diagram out how they all work together. I would not get a very good matchup between some of these protocols used in IoT to the OSI reference model, because they're not necessarily built on it. Some kind of fit in with various pieces at various layers of the OSI reference model, and some fit in across multiple layers because of the way they're built. This is all obviously an organic type of thing that has happened with these protocols, because you have a very, again, small footprint device in an IoT device. Small footprint, small processing power, small memory, small storage. So it really can't take a whole lot of extra coding or a whole lot of extra information before it starts to not function correctly, or just can't do the functions. So a lot of these have evolved over time due to the restrictions on IoT devices. Now, you can see in this list as well, there's things like DNS, for the discovery type layer. Well, DNS is in a couple of special flavors typically when you work with IoT, including a mobile form of DNS. Again, these are all smaller footprint versions of these pieces of the protocol stack. Some other things like WebSockets, we're familiar with that. Data protocols list here. Some of this is based on other more common types of protocols we'd see on networks. And because, again, these IoT devices are small footprint and not very smart and not very powerful, being able to build them in such a way that they can utilize an API type of connectivity is usually the goal. So you're trying not to make them do too much or think too much. Just do the one or two jobs you've assigned to them. The great thing about that overall, actually, is that you can have hundreds of these IoT devices connected in a network, and each one doing a small task, and suddenly you've got a big task accomplished by multiple IoT devices. Device management, there's specific protocols around that for managing the devices that you see in an IoT network. And then JSON, you may have already heard of. We've done some development on the web app side, for example. Well, there's light versions of that to make it work, again, correctly with IoT. And then there's multi-layer frameworks that cover all different pieces of the OSI reference model. So this is kind of a rough approximate matchup to OSI, but again, it's not exact and it's not the same layers necessarily. It's similar layers with sort of hybrid or modified functionalities. So where do we go from here? And the one thing I've heard consistently about IoT is, why isn't it standardized everywhere? How did it get this way? And who's going to do something about it? Well, there are lots of efforts underway, including ISO's efforts, as we'll talk about in a moment, but also folks like OWASP. OWASP has an IoT project, which can help developers, for the most part, and those who build IoT to follow some kind of structure. The hope is that, as with other OWASP projects, you'd be following some kind of standardized approach, and you'd add on OWASP as a kind of a best practice on top of whatever standardized approach you're using. OWASP isn't built to be a standard on its own. It's, as we probably all know in this call, OWASP is really a set of additional guidance. You shouldn't just use OWASP. You should use other structured methodologies in addition to OWASP, and that way you get a more full and mature security approach. But as you can see in this picture, IoT for OWASP is an active area of research and development. We talked about the attack surface areas, the IoT vulnerability list, they have event logging project. They have specific topic areas as well for things like medical devices and the firmware, because these devices are heavily reliant upon their firmware to run everything by the nature of their size and their capabilities. That analysis of the firmware is really important on the IoT side. And then on the far end, look what they've stuck on, the ICS and SCADA, because the utilities have typically thought of SCADA as being a unique thing unto itself. It's never been seen as, in a lot of utilities I've dealt with, it's never been seen as an area where they have to really put a lot of energy for security, because they figure it's running power grids, who cares? We saw an example in international realm, actually, of where SCADA networks, if they're vulnerable, it can have a catastrophic impact on a country. So it's a good idea to protect them, to look for ways to protect them. On a daily basis, I get between 5 to 10 alerts about weaknesses to SCADA-based systems. And these come up as IoT alerts. And typically they're pending security updates, or the recent release security updates to plug holes in SCADA-specific OSs and SCADA-specific software and applications that manage and monitor and run those SCADA networks. If you're not familiar with SCADA, SCADA is basically utilities. It can be a network that runs a water sewage system. It could be a power grid system. It could be a myriad of things, depending on how you're going to use it. But for people like Homeland Security in the United States and in Canada, our federal government, very keen to protect the infrastructure and to make sure it has some layers to it for the protection. And the SCADA network had been a neglected area for quite some time for security. So obviously it's come to the forefront now with recent world events, but also it's come to the forefront because of research by groups like OWASP and ISO, trying to make sure that we're ready for that next generation of security weaknesses and to protect our valuable infrastructure. And then they have even security policy project for this as well. So if you haven't checked out OWASP's project for IoT, definitely recommend that. And of course, ISO. ISO is building standards all the time, developing various new ways for us to have global standardization on how we approach security and other areas as well. I serve on the Standard Council of Canada Committee for IT security, and my inbox is overflowing with updates for IT security standards and new documentation and new things to review and look at. So it's a very active process within ISO globally to make sure we have standardized approaches to security. And they've focused on Internet of Things and related technologies like SCADA and things like that as well, all coming into this global approach to building global standards. And because ISO is international, it's representatives from across the globe and from different areas of various industries, it has a very broad base when it builds these standards of expertise to draw upon. So typically the results of the ISO organization are ones that can be adopted anywhere in the world at any time. So it makes it a very pervasive type of set of standards. Again, if you haven't checked out the ISO work on these standards on IoT, I put one reference up here. There's more, but if you just go to ISO's website, you can do a search for Internet of Things, and you'll get a long list of things that are being worked on. NIST in the United States, this is an offshoot of the federal government in the United States. NIST was built as kind of a research arm off of Defense Department originally, and it evolved into nationwide federal security kind of management organization that tries to keep on top of giving out best practices for anyone doing business with the federal government in the United States, and even with state governments and regional governments. NIST doesn't make standards, but they make frameworks and they make best practices. So their approach is a little bit different. When you read their documentation, it doesn't read like a standard. It reads like a, this is what you've got to do sort of document. It's far more prescriptive. In that sense, again, this would be a good thing to add on to a standard. If you're taking a standardized approach already, this can give you that extra layer for putting in proper security. Now, they do have a page dedicated to IoT, but for the most part, a lot of it is really other publications that they put out. They publish what are called special publications, SPs. And they have other SPs out there that talk about other areas of security, especially in IT and in communications and technology. And they put those together in a list under their IoT effort and added a couple of new items for IoT specifically. But a lot of it is existing NIST content, which tells you a couple of things. One, you don't have to reinvent the wheel for IoT, obviously. It's still technology. It's still a device communicating via a network somehow to some sort of centralized system or server or database providing information. And then it's something you can send commands back to do various things, perhaps to report information, to move, to change, to do something. And NIST has taken this approach from the outset. They're saying, look, you should apply these basics, and then specifically for IoT, here's some other things you could think about for the security as well. CIS I've used quite a bit for their benchmarks that they publish. They publish these things are called benchmarks, which are basically hardening guidelines, if you're not familiar with them. These hardening guidelines are built for different types of operating systems, applications, environments. For example, their CIS benchmark for Linux, very nice document. It's kept up to date by CIS. It's free. You can download these benchmarks for free. They can tell you how specifically to harden a Linux operating system version, blah, 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 and they'll take you through the steps for hardening it. Don't recommend you do that. You take that benchmark and just apply it tomorrow to your network without first testing it in a test bed, because you can shut off some things you might need to have functioning. But they're great guidance, and I've used them across the world. When I was working for another organization, I worked in multiple countries in various parts of the world, and I could use CIS benchmarks as a way to measure the hardening of a system, to make sure it's properly security hardened to some specific set of guidelines anyway. Well, they also publish a section they call CIS controls, and you can see that on the right-hand side of this slide under quick links. They have CIS controls. And they have controls around things like Internet of Things. So they've written specific documentation and they're updating this constantly on how to secure Internet of Things. Right now, this is a series of white papers, and there's more coming, I'm told. I've heard anyway. But CIS publishes these things, and they're contributed to by various representatives from the industry. It's not as broad a base as somebody like ISO would have access to, but they typically have some good information and good documentation here you can draw upon to help you secure your IoT. What else could be done? Well, a lot of things. There are some basics. For example, keeping your systems up to date, especially IoT devices, even those little Nest thermostats, home CCTV systems, even your car, actually, your car computer. There are updates to those devices. So making sure that on the consumer end, you're keeping those things up to date, and on the business end, you're keeping your systems up to date. And then the industrial end, these updates that I talked about a few minutes ago, security alerts from US CERT and other people about SCADA system weaknesses. Well, if you're not monitoring for those, you may not know you need to do those updates. So there should be a process in place for keeping track of those and making sure they're applied. Watching out for specific types of attacks, because IoT networks can be a vehicle to collect information to launch other types of attacks, like phishing attacks. You should be careful of a phishing attack that also tries to make you give away compromising information to exploit things like IoT networks. An attacker may just be asking you questions about what model of CCTV cameras you use, or you may get a phone call for someone purporting to be a salesperson saying, look, if you could tell me just what types of systems you're running right now, then I could give you our best solution. Well, unless that person is someone you know personally, or you already have an established NDA with them and you know who they are, I wouldn't recommend you give it any kind of information like that, because that can be used as an exploit vehicle. Antivirus as well, because there are specific types of malware written for IoT style networks, especially on the SCADA side. Keeping those networks perimetered, sectioned off, and having some perimeter defenses like AV and so on the devices attached to those networks. Great, very good idea. I walked into a SCADA control room one time, and they had 2 servers sitting there on a desktop, and a guy connected with his computer to those servers on the network, and nothing was protected with any kind of anti-malware systems. So they could have had a virus, because he was taking his laptop out and connecting to the corporate systems and coming back and connecting to the SCADA network. So making sure you have that segmentation, segregation, and also things like anti-malware in place on those networks, very important. Making sure that the default settings on SCADA devices are not left there. Even on consumer level ones, like your smart TV at home and things like that, make sure you go and check the default settings to see what they are, because often they're set a certain way you don't want them to be set. Especially with things like smart TVs, one weakness that was found was if you set up information sharing from the smart TV to share information back to the manufacturer about what you're doing, well, that information could be intercepted, or it could be used for other purposes that you didn't intend it to be used for. So it's a good idea to check those settings. And then there are some, right now, consumer level devices for home users called smart firewalls. And smart firewalls purport to be your IoT security solution. Now, I've installed one at home, but I went with a different type of product. It's a little more challenging for an end user to set up, I think, but it's fine if you have technical knowledge. But what these do is, these devices allow you to connect all your smart devices at home, your smart TV, your smart thermostat, your smart video camera, whatever you've got, to this smart firewall, instead of just connecting them up to whatever device your ISP provided you for your internet connection. The smart firewall has built-in anti-malware. It has built-in threat detection. It's connected to a cloud service to check for anomalous behaviors. So it's actually a very smart device that you typically see at a corporate network level, but in a smaller footprint, smaller platform. Not as advanced on the analytics side, but still quite good. And it can protect your IoT devices in an end user level. I should mention one more corporate piece too, or corporate level or industrial level type security. There are lots of providers out there providing other types of smart device or IoT device protection. And one of them in Canada was BlackBerry. BlackBerry's moved into security as a major service for them, because they had a large footprint secure platform in their BlackBerry phones. And they've transmuted that into an IoT security service. Here's another way you can get some protection in your IoT. Blockchain is an evolving area of security and for other purposes as well. We're all probably familiar with blockchain as a way to generate cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and so on. Well, it actually can be used in other ways. Now, blockchain on an IoT device doesn't sound like a very good idea because it takes processing power, and we all know that. Blockchain, its biggest downside is you need a lot of server horsepower to run a blockchain network, to create things like cyberattacks, to farm it. Well, on a blockchain network, a typical one, you have this kind of arrangement. You'd have an IoT transaction node, let's say, and you'd have an IoT transaction node, which includes a miner to help collect up information for you. This idea of blockchain, the concept is you're building pieces of transactions on top of each other, reliant upon the last piece that was built, and you're building them in a secure way with private keys. And they're going to be used to generate participation in any kind of network transactions, which is great. It's a great way to build secure transactions between devices. The problem is with the overhead it requires, an IoT device can't do this on its own typically. So here's what you can do. Your blockchain clients, your IoT devices in this case, are sitting over here. I don't think you typically want to do this for home network, but maybe in time the cost will come down. But let's say you have IoT devices sitting over here in your office. Well, they would actually rely upon a cloud service of sorts for the blockchain. So they wouldn't be doing it themselves, but they'd be participants and using blockchain produced information to do their transactions. Now, this is typically going to be an API type call from those client ends back and forth, so a small footprint type of communication, which is great. That'll work fine. And the thing that doesn't happen on this blockchain end, this client end, is they don't have a ledger of transactions locally. They rely upon this cloud layer up here, this service layer provided by somebody else to hold the ledger for the transactions, to keep track of what's valid, what isn't, what happened next after that. So it's not happening over here. These are still dumb devices with very little processing power on the right. Okay, I think that sums up everything I had to cover for today. And I'll pass this back over.
Thank you, Anthony, for this very informative webinar. I want to inform you that PCB provides training and certification services for ISO 27001 Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor. A PCB certificate will show your dedication in implementing and managing information security processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. Now, because of the time limitation, we will only be able to answer 1 to 2 questions. The first question is, how do you see IoT in the education sector?
Hey, no problem. Yeah, so IoT in education could be used for various purposes. I'll summarize that first bit a bit. It could be used for tracking student performance, participation, and so on through devices in classrooms. But it could also be used as a remote education tool. So an IoT device at a home, like a home-enabled secure device that a student could use to participate, could be used to participate in classrooms which aren't necessarily even in that person's city. And that participation could be tracked. You could do testing and so on through secure means through an IoT-enabled device. Now, it sounds like a webinar or computer-based training, but it actually could require a very low-tech, low-intelligence device to be sent to a student. So the cost gets very, very low to run that kind of system. And it also means that device in the student's hands could be specific for that purpose. So it couldn't be something that could be reused for other purposes that it wasn't meant for. So it makes it a more secure way to manage that type of interaction with students in classrooms and track progress.
Thank you, Anthony. Now, the last question for today is, from your experience, what's the one piece of advice for a business leader interested in the Internet of Things?
Look at blockchain today. Everybody else is. If you're going to get into IoT, blockchain for the security piece, very important. I even work with some lottery and gaming clients that are using blockchain now to secure the lottery transactions. It's very low footprint way to add security and very secure. And it can be a way to build your security over time in such a way that you can adapt it to increased numbers of IoTs, you can adapt it to increased lines of business very easily.
Thank you, Anthony, again for this informative insight in the IoT, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I would like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website along with the slides of the presentation. For more information, please visit our website www.pcb.com. Thank you all and have a great day.